Hey, Mike, I got Mike Ellison, former South Lakes point guard, a guy I went to UVA with, and an amazing artist, activist, actor, does a lot of things. He's a hard guy to define. I'm gonna let him do that himself. But Mike Ellison, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Julian, thanks for having me, man. It's an honor, bro.
Oh, great. Well, Mike, I met you, and I know you don't remember this, but I knew exactly who you were because I'd gone to all your high school basketball games. And you and David Harris were at the Dell one day, and you were just beginning your first year at UVA, and I might have been a first or second year law student, and we played pickup, and we went at it because I knew who you were, you knew who I was, and we went at it hard. And then David Harris and I are still friends to this day. We still do things quite often.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember going hard, man. I hope we shook hands when it was all over, though.
Oh yeah, we had some heated moments, but it was fun. You probably didn't know why is this guy playing me so hard? I'm just out here trying to get my hoop on. So,
man.
Well, anyway, Mike, and do you like to go by Mike or Mike E?
Mike is fine, man. Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike's fine.
So you're a very hard guy to define because you do a lot of very unique stuff, a lot of different stuff. Mm. You kind of remind me of Don Shirley. Don Shirley was the guy. The Green Book was his life was dramatized in Green Book. He was a classical pianist, but he really became a pop singer, and he infused lots of different things into his music. So it was really hard to define his music because it's really all his own. When I think about your work, I find it the same way because you started out kind of as a poet, and you kind of gravitated to something called Afroflow, right?
Afroflow, yeah.
Afroflow. But there's a little hip hop there, and that's your music. But then you have the other aspects of your artistry. How do you define yourself as an artist?
The term that the hardest question I always answer when people say, well, what do you do? And typically I say it depends on the week. Or my other answer is I learned how to fly on the way down, right? But I fashion myself as what I call an executive artist, because I live in both of those worlds, and I live in the crossroads of those worlds. I started out actually at UVA in communications, and I started out in public relations with the U.S. Tennis Association, which is where I met Joe Dumars. I was working on the Arthur Ashe AIDS Tennis Challenge at that time, is what it was called. Working with a number of folks were there, and I met Joe, and then that's what led to me ultimately coming to Detroit, working for a sports firm. And the poetry, I mean, I'd always been interested in hip hop and spoken word, but we had this dope spot in Detroit called Cafe Mahogany. So I used to go there open mic night, to kind of shake off my 9-to-5 blues. And then it just kind of took off from there.
So you were reading poetry, and it became more musical over time, or was it just poetry?
Well, so it's kind of like things happening at the same time. Growing up in Reston at that time, like go-go was the biggest music, but all my family was from South Jamaica, Queens. So I had cousins who I thought were the coolest men walking the planet. They could rap, my cousin Chris could rap, he could pop, he could lock, he could break, he could do graffiti. He was handsome, he had beautiful women. So, I thought he was the coolest thing walking. So I was always trying to imitate what he did from a hip hop standpoint. That was always constant in my life. But in Detroit, it was like spoken word. And then I went to the Detroit Repertory Theater, which really launched me as far as acting. And then I would meet different musicians. So it's like all of these things were happening simultaneously, but I still had a 9-to-5 and a job, in the sports industry, which is what everybody wanted at that time, but it just didn't fulfill me.
It's interesting how it just kind of evolved. And it's also interesting that you mentioned Joe Dumars, because you would have probably met Joe Dumars anyway, because he was Grant Hill's teammate, and you and Grant were such good friends. So you actually already knew Joe from your tennis work before you met him through Grant?
Yeah, I met him through, it was actually a sister named Leah Wilcox, who the whole world knows at the NBA. Mm-hmm. And I met her through Grant at the time. But when I was working for the USTA, we were looking for celebrities. And she's like, you got to bring Joe. He's a tennis fanatic. And so that's what kicked off that relationship.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, one thing about your work is it's often often refers and reflects and incorporates the struggle in Ethiopia. And you're actually a big star in Ethiopia. You were born there. I don't believe you're ethnically Ethiopian. I think your dad was working. Your dad, Bob Ellison, who was the first Black president of the White House Correspondents Association. And the reason why I know a little bit about your father is when I was Googling him, you have a beautiful short YouTube video that you made after he died. I guess he sounded like he died of lung cancer. But it sounds like that your father was there working, and so you spent the first 2 years of your life in Ethiopia. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, and also about your connection with Ethiopia?
Sure. So my father, again, from South Jamaica, Queens, he was an athlete. He ran for St. John's, got a gold at Melrose. He started in education. So he was working overseas in Ethiopia, and that's why I was born there. And in short, my parents got back to Virginia. My parents split, but, my father was still in our lives. But Reston is where my mother wanted to settle. So she always said, you're my Ethiopian child, you're my African child. You were born there for a reason. And I would have all these pictures and home videos and all these incredible stories. And a woman that helped take care of me when I was a baby, because my mother was sick and we didn't know if she was dead or alive. And ever since I was little, I would tell my mother, one day I'm going to go back to Ethiopia and I'm going to find her. And, so I just grew up with that consciousness. And as you know, a lot of our history is coming to the forefront now, but as Black men, as African Americans, we didn't know where we're from. We don't have any roots. So Ethiopia was like, it gave me a strong sense of purpose and identity. And as fate would have it, when I was in Detroit, I linked up with some Ethiopian doctors that were working to improve the medical infrastructure there. And I went there as a volunteer, but by then I had gotten into music, and I just kind of recorded a song, experimenting, recorded it, gave it to a few DJs over there, shot a video, met some incredible people that were doing great work over there. And then in short, the video just took off on national television and became like an anthem. And then the next time I came to Ethiopia, the whole country knew the song. They knew my story. There was a journalist who did his work after I was on his show, and he reunited me with this woman who was like a second mother to me in Ethiopia. I flew my mother in, they reunited. I mean, it changed my life completely, Julian. If you can imagine dreaming of just visiting Ethiopia your whole life, and then to go there and be like at the Nile River in the far reaches of, the we call Tisabai region. And you see children come out the river singing your song and screaming your name, go. I mean, it just changed me, bro.
Yeah. So the Mike, what's the name of the song, and what's the style of the song? Was the style of the song more something you'd hear in America, or is it more Ethiopian type of influence?
That's a good question. It's more like it's kind of like hip hop R&B meets traditional Ethiopian music. The song was called Ethiopia, Everything Will Be All Right. Obviously inspired by Bob Marley, also inspired by what I knew about the country, but not wanting to kind of perpetuate this whole, poverty stereotype, but not ignoring some of the challenges. So it's very upbeat. And you mentioned Afro Flow. Afro Flow was something I developed as a platform inspired by the late, great Nigerian artist, Fela Anikulapo Kuti, who created Afrobeat. So I thought of Afro Flow just to remind us of the roots of hip hop and humanity. And so we developed Afro Flow into its own platform for a lot of like community engagement and social outreach initiatives. But that song, it was a divine accident. I could not have planned it, strategized it, or what have you. But what it showed me, Julian, is that without the formal music industry, if you have art, you can make an impact. And so working with these doctors, my hero in Ethiopia, this woman named Sister Tebeba Mako, we leveraged that song to help build clinics and support programs with no industry support. So that really just changed the course of my life when I saw what you could do by combining art, community outreach, and business.
So before that song, Ethiopia, Everything's Going to Be All Right, you were still working, and that song kind of made you into a full-time artist? Is that where your career really changed?
That's a good question. I think by that time I was full-time artist, but it launched me in a different direction. And it also let me know that Afro Flow was a viable platform. And so I had done one event for the American Cancer Society. And then as a freelance, I was working for myself, still like PR, marketing, freelancing, and being an artist. And I had done some work on this campaign that the NAACP did. My father had left the White House by then and was working with a man named Lon Walls Communications. And they hired me freelance to go on this NAACP voter registration tour. So we would go into the Deep South, rap tour bus, make a ruckus, register people. And I was doing all the press and PR on it. And we're just working around the clock. And so I'm kind of like giving you the cliff notes, but I basically took the concept of what we did on that voter registration tour, married that with music and spoken word, and created the Afro Flow tour. And the American Cancer Society came on as my partner. And so we use music and live performance and community engagement as a way to raise awareness around cancer prevention and treatment, but also tobacco cessation among youth. So that developed into a platform here stateside, where we went to high schools, hospitals, universities, clubs, cafes, the projects, retirement homes. We even went to First Nation reservations and just used music and art as that tool. But there was also, I would say, like you have deliverables when you have sponsors like that. So we just developed that whole model. And then I worked to supplement that sponsorship with the American Cancer Society. So like at one point we had Chrysler Communications, Fuse Beverages, Peli Peli, which made apparel I'd done some work for. Ethiopian Airlines was a sponsor at one time. And it just became this whole platform that ran almost 7 years.
About what time frame is this that we're talking here?
This is like around 2007, 2008, from there on.
Right.
Yep.
And
no, we covered a lot of ground there. I hope I didn't lose.
No, this is good. So while this is going on, do you still have time to create and do you have time to because your music is very it's very unique. It probably requires a lot of creativity. So do you still have a lot of time to take your music in different directions in your poetry?
Yes and no. During the tour, I didn't. So the tour, I used that too. I used the music that we played was off my first album called Afro Flow, and it was heavily influenced by my sojourn back to Ethiopia and the work that I was doing and the people I met. So that first album, Afro Flow, was really kind of like a life journey. And so I put everything into making that album. And then we used that music during the tour with the American Cancer Society. And so to answer your question, I kind of like, it was like a cycle. It took me all year long, every year, to get the tour up and to get sponsors and get dates set up. So it's like I would go out, I would tour about 2 to 3 months, sometimes 4 with the Afro Flow tour, come back, write, create. At that time, film incentives have come to Detroit or to Michigan. So I was auditioning and it was able to get booked on some TV shows and film, and then take a short break and then start all over again. So that was kind of like my cycle, create when I can in spare time, get the tour up and running, go out, do what we had to do with the tour. And I was going to Ethiopia 2 to 3 times a year at that time as well. And then, shooting. I did 2 seasons of HBO Deaf Poetry, some TV shows, a few films, and just really, man, swinging from one vine to the next at that time.
Yeah. Well, you have a recent work called Way Fakir, I believe it's pronounced, and it's doing really well on YouTube. Is this how your work has evolved? Is this something? And this is a new project? Is this is where your work is going? I want you to tell us about the project as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so to kind of back up, like that one song, Ethiopia, Everything Will Be All Right. That's the song almost all Ethiopians know me for. Since then, I had released 3 albums, Afro Flow 2, and a album called Flatanium, and had done other projects, but was just kind of quiet. You and I talked offline about, not being as active on social media as I should be. So I've kind of just recently re-engaged more. And there's a horrible conflict going on in Ethiopia that we could talk more about, but It's been raging for 1.5 years and nobody's talking about it. And, all the major players are involved: China, Russia, the Ukraine. People don't want to talk about it, but they're one of the biggest suppliers of arms to Ethiopia right now. That's just the truth. The UAE, all sorts of folks are involved in this conflict in Ethiopia. And it's being presented as it's only about ethnic tensions, and it's not only about that, but that is a big part of it. So Fikir means love. And one of the most beloved singers of Ethiopian history is a man named Mahmoud Ahmed, incredible singer. And he has this classic song called Fikir. So working with my good friend and producer, Mark Chu, we sampled it and wanted to talk about the conflict through the lens of love and romance. Because if it was politicized, those divisions are already too deep. I mean, you have families that aren't speaking to each other right now. So we wanted to talk about the conflict through the lens of a love affair, a love story. And so that's what we did. And so it is a new direction for me, because it's kind of like elements of Ethiopian music. The drum programming is consistent with current hip hop, but then like the acoustic and electric guitar sounds like folk music. I was inspired by old folk songs like Joan Baez's classic Diamonds and Rust. And so it's more of a vocal approach that's like that. A little bit of Nipsey Hussle influence in that song as well. You know, so all of that went into that one song with the hopes that at least it would spark some positive dialogue about reconciliation.
Yeah, so we're going to get back to more of your work, including your Emmy Award that you won for your work in One Nation. But why don't we talk a little bit about the Ethiopian conflict? Americans living in America, we hear a lot about Cuba, we hear about the Middle East. There are certain hotspots that we hear a lot about. But Ethiopia is one of the hottest and most dangerous places in the world, and it's been that way for a year and a half, a couple of years, I believe. Can you just maybe give us like Ethiopia 101? What is the general conflict? What has gone on to create some of the troubles in Ethiopia over the last few years?
Sure. Well, I want to preface my statement by saying any opinion or perspective I offer is just one. It is not the defining perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's semi-informed because I'm still stateside. And I have to say that for the Ethiopian audience, because there are huge political divisions right now. I'm going to slightly correct you. Ethiopia has become dangerous, but prior to this conflict, I knew it to be beautiful and historic. And
that's what I meant. I was talking about.
I know. By the way, man, you look Ethiopian. You probably have a lot of people speak Amharic to you when you go out.
All the time. Especially when I used to race bicycles, I got really thin. At that point, I really look Ethiopian. But when I gain weight, not so much.
Right. So, well, how do I frame it? At the center of the conflict is basically between the federal government and some of the former party that ran the country that are from the Tigray region. So the main conflict is between the federal government and the Tigray region. But people confuse political parties with innocent people all the time. The same way we're saying, let's not persecute all Russians because of Putin, what we need to be saying in Ethiopia. But there's this big rift now because you have the federal government and you have the Tigray region, which is in northern Ethiopia, and then it's spilled into all of the country. So every region has been affected now. The Afar region, the Amhara people, the Oromo people have been affected. But the main conflict is between the federal government and Tigray. So, and there are some Ethiopians that would take what I'm about to say as a political statement, but it's not. The Tigray region has been under siege for a year and a half. So we're talking about the Ukraine being under siege. Well, what does that mean for the Tigray region in Ethiopia? It means no food, no fuel, no telecommunications, no banking, no electricity, no medicine, nothing. I have family and friends that I have not been able to reach for over a year and a half now. And I have friends and family in other parts of the country as well. So at the heart of the conflict is this tug of war between the federal government and the Tigray region. I'm way oversimplifying it, but that's what's happening. But the other part of it, Julian, is that you have multinationals and you have other countries that are selling armaments, and that helps fuel this conflict. The other piece that they're not talking about is that Ethiopia constructed its own dam called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's a major dam that can give power to the entire country of Ethiopia and Sudan. And they built it with no funds from the IMF or the World Bank, something that almost never happens in Africa. So I think history would suggest there's more at play than what we're seeing. But I don't want to misspeak and try to sound like an expert that I'm not. But the bottom line is that millions of people have been displaced and millions are facing the prospect of starvation. And so it's, you know, the principle of yes and fuels improv in the acting world, right? Mm-hmm. So I see this as yes, and yes, we should stand with Ukraine and we should have sympathy and empathy for them. And we should do what we can to help. And we should be concerned about innocent men, women, and children in Yemen and Syria and Ethiopia. But, you know, when the Ukraine conflict started, it got more coverage in 2 days than all of Ethiopia, than the Ethiopian conflict in a year and a half. You know what I mean? So that's what's troubling. It makes it hard for people outside of Ethiopia to understand what's going on because they don't understand all of the history. And then depending on who your friends are, depending on what tribe they're from, you may get a biased opinion. That's why I want to try to speak about it from a neutral standpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, you've got people who have been under siege and who are isolated, and it is spilled into every region of the country. And then it becomes this competition of who's suffering more. And I don't want to get into that. Like, you know, this group of people, this tribe versus that tribe, millions of people are at risk right now. And the United Nations is not doing what it could to make sure people are getting aid and assistance just to get by on a day-to-day basis.
How does the rest of the Western world handle it? Are they more involved in trying to help? And what about the other African countries?
Again, I don't want to misspeak as a policy expert, but I don't know, Julian. It seems like a kind of an odd hands-off, hands-on approach. A lot of the nations are selling military equipment and weapons, but aid isn't getting through. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The African Union hasn't been able to resolve it. And it's kind of this thing where, you know, we don't want the narrative of the Western savior, but at the same time, the Western world has its hand in Africa all the time. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So this notion of aid becomes tricky. It's like, if I come in your beautiful home and I steal your big screen TV and I take it to my house, then I say, "Oh, Julian, man, the Final Four is this weekend. You want to let me help you out. You want to come over and watch it?" You know what I mean? It's kind of like that. Ethiopia has a lot of resources that other countries want to get their hands on. They have fertile soil that other countries want to get their hands on. The same reason why, you know, in the Congo, you hear about Coney 2012, and we oversimplified that way back in the day and made it about one military madman who's enslaving children. But we're not talking about all the multinationals that have been in the Congo for years, extracting the cobalt and the coltan, which is in all of our electronics. So, I mean, it could go on for days, but you know, the interest in Africa it's an imbalanced relationship. Yeah. It's a take, and I give you a couple crumbs, and I'll take some more, then I give you a couple crumbs. And by the way, here's why it's important. This is a bit of a history lesson, but the former emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, tried to warn the world about Mussolini and Hitler. And he went to the League of Nations and said, look, we're a member of the League of Nations. Mussolini's trying to invade us. Today it's us, tomorrow it will be you. And it was. And they ignored Haile Selassie. Now, I could go further back to 1896 when the Ethiopians defeated the Italians in something called the Battle of Adwa. It was an embarrassment for Europe because going back to the Berlin Conference is when they carved up Africa and drew these new territories and said, France, you get this, and Germany, you get that. And nobody informed the Africans. And Italy was supposed to get Ethiopia. Ethiopia had other ideas. And so ever since 1896, Italy had been dead set on getting back into Ethiopia, which they ultimately did with Mussolini. That led to a whole nother series of events. But my point is, this conflict has been raging in Ethiopia for a year and a half, and the world has ignored it. And all the national players, all the multinationals and major countries have been involved. And then a year later, what do we see? We see this invasion of the Ukraine. So we say things like during COVID, we're all in this together, we're all connected, but we don't seem to behave that way. And so our diplomacy and our sympathy is only extended to certain people in certain countries at certain times and for certain reasons.
What effect is the fact that Ethiopia has never been a colonized country? It's been an independent country, I believe. So it's different than most of the African countries. Do you think that has any effect on these kind of factors?
I do. I mean, the Ethiopian people collectively are fiercely independent. But just the same way, like we talk about here in America, Black men, Black women are not a monolith. Ethiopians are not a monolith either. You know, there's over 80 dialects in Ethiopia. There's different cultural aspects all over the country. But instead of always being presented as the cornerstone of poverty in Africa, I would like to see Ethiopia presented as one of the cornerstones of civilization, which it is. So I think, to your point, yes, the fact that it's never been colonized is an important factor. And we see what happens when African nations seek their own economic independence. It doesn't usually bode well for them. You know, we talk about refugees. I mean, like, again, it's yes and yes, we should welcome the Ukrainians, but will they be welcomed the same way the Haitians were? When we just saw men on horseback with whips beating men? Is that how we're going to greet them? Because America has a much closer tie to Haiti, who threw off their oppressors, including France and England. But when they threw off France, that led to the Louisiana Purchase. The United States wouldn't be what it is without Haiti, right? We should be celebrating these brave people who David threw off Goliath multiple times. But what did Haiti get in return? A worldwide boycott, essentially, that has resignated them to poverty. And then when there's conflict and they want to come to the United States, they're greeted on horseback with whips. But then we see people in the Ukraine that look, walk, and talk more like us. We have these open arms. So it's that inconsistency, man, that bothers people, myself included, as you can tell.
I like yes and, because I always say misery for all. So people will say, you know, there's something going on horrible in one part of the world, and someone say, well, you didn't care when it happened over there. And but what you say is yes and, which I like, because we should do something for both. I always say, you know, misery for all. Just because we didn't do anything there, it doesn't mean we don't want to do anything here. But I like your way of saying it's better.
Well, and let me be clear, you know, when I say that, I mean, we've all gone through a tough, tumultuous couple of years.
Yeah.
And you can, you know, because of these cell phones, you can get bad news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. So I don't expect, you know, everybody to just jump up now and hashtag Ethiopia. It doesn't necessarily work like that. And we all have challenges, you know. I mean, am I as knowledgeable and involved in what's happening to the people in China, the Uyghurs? You know, like, you're going to be more culturally sensitive to what you understand. And I get that. So I don't blame anybody for not necessarily knowing about it. But what I do look at is American policymakers, and I look at mainstream media. The blackout as it relates to Ethiopia seems like is strange and is eerie. And that's what I'm speaking to more. Because you wouldn't know. You don't know what you don't know. And, you know, if we base our day-to-day happiness on whether there's conflict in the world, we'll never be happy. Right. So there is that balance. But if we're going to talk about the Ukrainian people and what they're going through with all the sympathy and empathy and aid and assistance. And by the way, Ethiopia has been considered a friendly partner to the United States for decades. They call them one of the most important strategic partners in the fight against global terrorism. But we're turning our back on them. Now, the complex part, Julian, is that there are some Ethiopians who say, America, stay out of our business. Let us handle it ourselves. But then they'll also say, but don't break the trade agreement with us. You see, so it's complex, man, and emotions get involved. And so what I try to do is just focus on the humanitarian aspect of it and figure out how can we put pressure on the powers that be to just get the basics the people are trying to get by day to day, right? I mean, what was the pandemic like for us as Americans with resources?
Yeah.
So now imagine the isolation that people are feeling all over that country right now.
Yeah.
It's tough, man.
Yeah, without the ability to work remotely and all the things that we have in the Western world.
And the comforts and electricity and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
yeah.
Well, look, Mike, that's fascinating. And I hope folks will actually look at the conflict in Ethiopia and think deeply of it. And as you said, not necessarily take your word for it, but come up with their own thoughts and about it. But let's go back to how you got started, because I think it does inform your artistry and also all your work. So we were talking offline that you recently reconnected with your South Lakes roots because the team went to the state tournament this year. You were a point guard on Grant Hill's '89 team. You guys won the region, and you went to the state tournament and got to the semifinals and lost to a tough Hampton team. But you and I remember you and Mike Taylor as being just these quick, active point guards that did a great job. And you had Grant and you had Rob Robson as your big guys, and I think you had one of the Harwoods as well. But and Chucky Gibson, I don't want to leave him out. But let's go back to how did you get started in basketball, and what made you the player that you became?
My big brother introduced me to basketball, my brother Rob. And, we always joke, if I had his height, my life would be different. He was 6'4".
Wow.
And so my mother kept saying, oh, this one doctor said you're going to be taller than your brother. And so I kept waiting for a growth spurt that never came, Julian. So I had no choice, man. I was short and scrawny. So I just had to be quick and scrappy and get in where I could fit in. Man, I mean, I would say I was a solid contributor, and I think defense is where I had an opportunity to impact the game, playing with guys like you mentioned, because I wasn't going to get many shots. But really, my big brother Rob got me started in basketball and, pretty much beat me and tortured me most of my life until I was good enough to beat him. And then that kind of let me know, okay, I can play competitively now.
Yeah. Who are some of your heroes, like growing up in terms of players like an Isaiah Thomas, or you're 4 or 5 years younger than me, but who are some of the guys that you saw playing and you wanted to play like?
The easy hero for me, and most of Northern Virginia, if we're going to be honest, Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson. Man, that guy was so good. People don't even know how good Michael Jackson was.
Yeah.
I mean, in high school, he could do anything he wanted before the 3-point line. And when, as you know, growing up in this area, Georgetown was bigger than any professional team. And so as a freshman, Michael Jackson, I think he dropped like 33 on Syracuse before the 3-point line. And so I feel like he sacrificed a lot of his game to be part of that team system that they had. And obviously Ewing was the man, but easily hands down, Michael Jackson was the player that inspired me the most. And then getting to meet him later, he was very kind, very gracious, shared a lot of information, a lot of wisdom. In fact, I would love to reconnect with him, but he was most influenced. And then this might surprise you, but Charles Barkley was my favorite.
I didn't see that coming.
No, in fact, there was a joke. They used to call me Boney Barkley because I don't know. Again, man, when you're the youngest in the household, and then I had older and taller cousins, so you're the brunt of all the jokes, and you get pushed around on the football field or basketball court, you get a little chip on your shoulder, and I definitely have one. As you said, we probably went at it. That chip probably came out. So I liked his aggressive nature and his physicality. And so even though I was little and scrawny, I wanted to be physical. So I love Barkley. I used to wear the sweatband up on my forearm like Barkley did. Back in the day, people had them down here. I used to rock this one forearm like Barkley on one forearm.
Yeah. It's interesting because you just picked two players with not only their different games, you couldn't have more different personalities than Barkley. Huge personality, huge. And then Michael Jackson, he does not have the personality of a great athlete. He's very, like you said, he's very mild-mannered, doesn't like the limelight. He does his job in a very unassuming way. It's just funny. Those are the two guys you arrived at.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know Charles Barkley personally back then, right? Because we had social media wasn't around, so I didn't know his persona, but just I liked his attitude on the court, you know, and I mimicked that probably a little too much, but you know, at the time it was a superpower. It helped me out a lot.
Yeah. Well, we all know a lot about Grant Hill. You know, he's probably the greatest player in the history of Northern Virginia. He's in the Hall of Fame. How did you meet Grant, and what kind of teammate was Grant to play with? Maybe some things about Grant we may not know.
Well, you know, my mother used to teach at the Reston Children's Center. And so that's how we met, through the Reston Children's Center. So my mother, you know, God bless her, man. My mother, you know, single mother, work with children all day and then come home and then take care of the three of us. So that's essentially how we met. I mean, I think, you know, like you said, you know a lot about Grant. I think as a teammate, again, you know, he's going to lead by example. He's going to be the first to arrive, last to leave, work hard, play hard. I think, if I'm honest, I think he gets a bit of a knock that I don't know is deserved, because he didn't have that Charles Barkley type personality or in your face attitude. In some ways, he got branded in a way that I don't think is fair. You know, people say, oh, he's soft or whatever. And I never saw him as that. Anybody who played with him never saw him as that. And I would say this, as a professional, you know, Grant earned his stripes in the 90s. That was the 90s NBA. So as much as he had to go to the hole, I don't know that you could be soft and go to the rack as often as he did and as frequently as he did. Yeah. So I think that that's a nugget that maybe we don't talk about that people might miss. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think also, you know, he's a bit of LeBron before LeBron. You know, again, Michael Jordan was such a dominant figure. Everybody wanted to be if you weren't, they wanted to present you as the next Michael Jordan. And from what I know, Grant's favorite player growing up was always Magic Johnson. Mm-hmm. He was more Magic with athleticism than he was Michael. Yeah. And so because he didn't have Michael's approach, then that, you know, I think, you know, people were looking to make a comparison that wasn't there.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why Grant was able to develop almost that point forward type, that position, that he's one of the first guys that we refer to in that way, is because he had a coach, Wendell Byrd, that understood him. And Coach Byrd could think outside the box. You know, when you played and when I played especially, we thought of tall guys, get inside, get in the paint, and, you know, get some rebounds. But, you know, Coach Byrd will let Grant do his thing. He let Grant go coast to coast, let Grant shoot outside. Grant, after you graduated, played point guard on the team with Joey Byrd the year after. So why don't you talk a little bit about Coach Wendell Byrd and his influence on you?
Well, I'll tell you this, you know, I used to say I was little and scrappy. So me and Grant used to play one-on-one full court. So I like to think he got some of his early ball handling skills, learning how to avoid somebody that was down by his ankles. Yeah. You know, I mean, I think here's how I would look at it. Coach Byrd carried himself with a lot of dignity and a lot of class. And so I think, if anything, that's what I admired or respected most about him. If I'm being forthright with you, the coach that had the most influence on me as a player and as a person is the late, great Reginal Kitchen. Because Reggie Kitchen, Mr. Kitchen, God bless him, he understood that if you're a Black man in a community where a lot of young men don't have fathers, right, and you're a coach, you're more than a coach. And so Reggie Kitchen probably had more influence on players in the entire Northern Virginia area than anybody I know. Michael Jackson, Tommy Amaker included. If you ask them, they will point to Reginald Kitchen. Mike Taylor, who you mentioned, Reggie Kitchen saw him playing pickup ball and was just like, so what, you just gonna be a pickup legend? And he went to Mike's job, took him off the job and said he won't be coming back, and made him fill out papers to apply to George Mason, where Mike Taylor got in and walked on the team. Yeah. And Mike Taylor, who's a pastor and an educator to this day, will credit. Right? Yes, he is. And he would tell you he owes his college education to Reginal Kitchen.
Wow.
So that's the guy that I and a lot of people, Brian Hill, if you talked to Brian Hill on here, right?
Not yet, but I'm gonna have him and Gus on soon.
I don't want to steal this story. So I'll let Brian tell you his Mr. Kitchen story. But when he passed, Brian Hill told me a story about Mr. Kitchen that damn near brought me to tears. Yeah. And what he said to him and what he did for him. So now I was going back to basketball. What I loved most about playing under Coach Byrd was I think we used to call it a 12, a 1-2-1-1 press. And I loved that. That was fun. That press gave people hell, and I loved playing that press.
Grant told me something that was very disappointing. He said you guys had pull that press out like at a rec club, at a recreation center, and you use that on teams that weren't prepared, and you would just destroy people in pickup games with that press. Is that true?
No, I don't know, man. That's like a distant, probably so. Probably, yeah. we probably did. I mean, you know, it's interesting. I mean, those were good times, and basketball was a big part of my life. But at the same time, I think my experiences in Detroit, traveling around the country with the tour, the things I think I've seen and experienced in Africa and the beauty, you know, playing a festival with the late, not the late, sorry, but playing a festival with Lauryn Hill, you know, in Rwanda. And I'm not saying it's like trying to flex, but my point is just, it broadens your perspective. So some of these other things that seem so important and seminal start to fade a little bit.
Yeah.
And seem less important. And I'm not about to like try to Al Bundy your audience and have illusions of grandeur and you know what I'm saying, make myself grander than I was. You know,
Al Bundy played in the NFL. So Mike, you have been on some big stages. You've done some incredible things. I've loved following your. That's the thing I love about Facebook is someone that I didn't even know very well, just from playing ball. I've been able to follow your career from afar for the last 10 years or so. But do you remember those days when South Lakes played at regionals? I went to Robinson, but I'd come back and watch regionals. There'd be 6,000 people there. It had like the feeling of a prize fight when you guys are walking to the.
It did.
The gym. Yeah. I mean, those games meant so much. I remember when you guys won the region. I can't remember. You may have beaten Chantilly in the regional final. You beat Chantilly in the final that day. My boy Russell Payton. But do you remember those days and the energy you guys brought to the community?
I do. Russell was tough, man. I always respected him. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't mean to minimize those days by any means. There's nothing better. You're in high school. It's a Friday game. You're playing Herndon. Well, I want to say to all my dear friends, Man Johnson, Randy Dodson, I never lost to a Herndon team in my life. So I don't know what that's like. But
is Gary Hall going to agree with that?
Yes, he will. Coach Hall, you know, he was our freshman coach at South Lakes.
That's right, yeah.
Coach Hall was that. By the way, I'm so glad you mentioned him. Coach Hall is my man. Gary Hall was a great coach, and he made himself a great coach. Yeah. A lot of respect for Coach Hall, and he made Herndon formidable when he went over there.
He did.
I just never had the unfortunate experience of losing to Herndon as a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. But no, man, the energy that we brought to the community, that it was just magic. You know what I mean? The way the love and the support from the community, everybody encouraging you. I remember those battles against Chantilly in that regional game. And I think if there's any game that probably stands out in all of our minds, myself, Grant, Jerome, Rob, it would be the come from behind win against W&L. That was magic.
That was Crawford Palmer, UVA, Duke, and that squad, yeah.
It was that squad, the Withers brothers.
Withers brothers, that's right.
They were tough, man.
Were tough.
And I think we were down by 14 or 16 points, and then Grant just went nuts. And then we're tied, and they're taking the ball out. And then, you know, Coach Byrd was always big on deny, make a tough pass. And I made one of the Withers brothers make a tough pass, and I got, it was an easy steal, but I got the steal. I gave it to Jerome because he was the man. And then Jerome throws this incredible alley-oop to Grant, and that was the go-ahead score. So we won on the alley-oop after being down by 14. That was a special game.
Yeah, I saw many of your games, Mike. I didn't even know you, but I knew I knew your game really, really well because you guys were a lot of fun to watch. You're a good point guard. So look, before you get to your UVA days, were you already thinking about rapping and poetry when you were young, or did that something that evolved later on?
Yeah, you know, I'd always done it, you know, not as well as I probably thought I was doing it at the time because I was, you know, I was trying to imitate my cousins and stuff. But you know, hip hop was just really, hip hop supplemented my education. I gravitated to the more progressive parts of hip hop, and there was a study done in terms of like college enrollment and literacy during the 80s and 90s linked with cultural hip hop. So it definitely influenced me in a major way. In fact, when I was at South Lakes, I don't know if this was the first time this happened, but me, Mike Taylor, Carl Lowe, and Jimmy Walk ran on an all-black ticket for student government, and we won. You know, so you know, I was president and vice president and all that of student government at the time, and it was largely influenced by this conscious hip hop and wanting to get involved in a positive way. So I always had that balance, like, okay, here's academics, and then here's art, and then here's sports. And those things always just ran hand in hand for me. We didn't know about the industry. We didn't know what it meant to really do that full time. So it was just something fun. And then I think when I got to Detroit, I met various people in the industry, and I thought for a second, hey, maybe that is something I want to do. It really wasn't meant for me. And what my experience in Ethiopia taught me was that we say the music industry or the entertainment industry. And I think you have to be careful with that lexicon. There is an entertainment industry, and it has given us, well, the best have come through it, like Stevie, Michael, Prince. But like, there's Ethiopian artists that y'all never heard of, and they're not part of that larger industry. They have their own thing, and some of them make a better living than people in the industry. You know what I mean? So the industry does facilitate artistry, but not always. And so for me, it just let me know I can embrace artistry without the so-called industry. I've had opportunities to work within it, but I'm not a major player in the industry. I've always saw myself as a grassroots artist who's had opportunities to do things in the industry.
Well, growing up, did you have a trained voice? Did you read music? Were you trained on instruments or?
No, man, I wasn't trained on I wasn't trained on any of that, man. Not at all. Not at all.
That's beautiful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your UVA days.
Okay.
So you got there fall of '89. South Lakes is a relatively progressive place. I know I got to be careful talking about that, but it was a planned. Reston was a planned community where you had different races, different socioeconomic levels living in the same school district, which is very rare for Fairfax County. I went to Robinson, which was almost completely white and upper middle class. So you had a completely different experience than I did, just 10 miles away. But so was it a transition when you went to UVA, which at the time still felt like a little bit of a Southern school, which was socially very segregated at the time. You had the parties. The black community had their own parties, fraternities, sororities. They still do. Now the whites had their own, white folks there had their own sororities. What was it like, the transition for you?
It's interesting when you mentioned Reston, because I mean, I grew up in Northgate Apartments. And so when people I meet from Reston, they think everybody in Reston is rich. We weren't rich, but because of the setup of Reston, I could have a mix of classmates, and that gave you exposure to all kind of folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And Reston was progressive, but at the same time, you know, Daryl Branch will tell you when all the George Floyd stuff happened, and we had a series dealing with racism, working with Loudoun County out at the Franklin Park Arts Center. But Daryl joked, he was like, man, you were the only person I knew back then talking about racism. So that was kind of an isolating feeling to be in high school and be aware of these issues, and nobody wants to hear that. Your friends don't, your teachers don't, fellow students don't. So I carried a little bit of that with me at UVA. And UVA felt like a Black school within a school.
Yeah.
A lot of people I went to school would talk about that. I wanted to go to Hampton. And I was all set to go to Hampton. And then I received something from UVA basically saying, how come you didn't apply? And then I, you know, again, just trying to be different. everybody I knew wanted to get into UVA and go to UVA. So I decided I want to go to Hampton. I want to go to HBCU. I want that experience. But then I got in, and then my best friend Carlo, who's an incredible doctor in Charlotte, he got in, and we were thick as thieves. So it was like, nah, I gotta go to UVA now. You know what I mean? And so that's what that was like. And it felt very much like a school within a school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was beautiful, beautiful campus. I can't say that I had any really overtly bad experiences at UVA. I mean, there's a little stuff with campus police and you get followed or things of that nature, but for the most part, my time was peaceful, and it was a great time, you know.
It was a great time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so after college, and we touched on this earlier, it sounds like you got a job in communications with the U.S. Tennis Association.
I did. I didn't play a lick of tennis.
And that's how you started your career. That led you to Detroit, and which is how this whole thing happened.
Yes. And then what led me to work for myself, which I've done now since, you know, a few years after arriving in Detroit. A good friend of mine, fraternity brother, and I went to Cancun. And so Cancun ruined it for me.
Yeah.
What happened was, like, it wasn't that we just had this wild time. You know what it was, Julian? And this is obviously no offense to anybody who chooses a different path. I mean, my mother gave us a life because of the kind of job and the structure of a 9-to-5. But what happened was I was on vacation with my friend Derek Houston, who's been like a sports executive for years. And I just couldn't wrap my head around the concept that I have to be back at a certain place at a certain time. I must be back if I want to continue to eat and have a roof over my head. And for the rest of my life, that is how I will live. I must be at this place at this time to do these things. And now, any job, any gainful employment is a huge blessing. But when you're young and you're trying to figure yourself out, for whatever reason, Julian, that just never sat well with me. Mm. And I never recovered. I mean, I lasted there, that the firm I worked at, maybe another year and a half or so, but my mind was elsewhere by then. And then I knew that I wanted to do something in the arts, but I felt like, well, I went to this school, I went to UVA, and it's a good school, and I've got a few relationships, so I should want to do these sort of jobs, but I didn't. They didn't fulfill me. And so I had to figure it out.
Well, how has Detroit influenced your art? Detroit, had such a huge effect on the auto industry, but also the music industry with Motown. But after the 70s, the city kind of fell apart, and it's had struggles, and it's rebounded. It's come back. It's got some beautiful areas now. It's a lot of exciting things happening in Detroit. How is living in Detroit rather than a place like DC, kind of the government seat of America? How has living in Detroit influenced your artwork?
Well, let's see. If any Detroit people lock in, they're gonna make sure they're gonna check me on everything I say. Detroit is very protective of itself. So the short answer is that a lot of the greatest artists in the world come out of Detroit. Mm-hmm. And Motown became the model for the music industry. Yeah. And it wasn't just the talent, though. It was also the mind of Berry Gordy. It was the work ethic. It was the discipline. It was the integrity of all of the people who contributed to that. My first film credit was portraying Benny Benjamin, one of the drummers who was one of the Funk Brothers, the backing band that made all those Motown hits soar. And that film, directed by a guy who became a friend, Paul Justman, Standing in the Shadows of Motown, is responsible for them getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that said, you can't really talk about Detroit music without talking about the blues from the South, because during the Great Migration, all of these incredible artists and people came up there. So you got to talk about John Lee Hooker if you're going to talk about music and blues, and which is the foundation of all American music. So that's a part of Detroit. Detroit is also the creator of techno, which people call EDM dance music. But those were Black men and women who were innovative and learned to do things with keyboards and drum machines that the manufacturers themselves didn't know how to do. Then you have to talk about like Parliament Funkadelic that influenced Detroit. And then guys like Amp Fiddler, who most of your audience wouldn't know, but he was the mentor to the late, great Dilla, recognized as one of the greatest hip hop producers of all time. So there's all these layers in Detroit. And basically for me, Julian, I met people who never left Detroit. They take offense to any notion of a comeback because they never left and they continue to propel the city forward. And so they're just hard-nosed, tough, but beautiful, community-minded people that help you kind of see the world from a different lens. You know, what people don't realize is Detroit is an international city. There's over 125 languages spoken in Detroit. And it shares a waterfront with Canada, and more trade between any two countries on the entire earth takes place right there at that border between Detroit and Windsor. So there's a lot of layers there. And and part of being an artist is observation. And so if you're quiet and you step back and get out of your own head or out of your own ego, you know, like as Kendrick Lamar would say, sit down, be humble, then you meet artists, visual artists, poets, musicians, producers, all of these people that just create. And it's just infectious, you know. Yeah.
Well, why don't we move on to your project? Because you won an Emmy, which is unbelievable, for as co-producer of a project to attract tourism to Detroit. Why don't you tell us about that project and how you won the Emmy?
Yeah, so that was a friend of mine did some work for Detroit Metro Convention and Visitors Bureau. And then they came, you know, he came to me and they said, oh, they want to do a Christmas jingle. And I was like, man, that's corny. Let's do something more progressive. And then we just threw out Detroit, One Nation Under a Groove by Parliament Funkadelic. And so I just heard the song differently. And we were working with this incredible kids choir, the Detroit Academy of Arts and Sciences, under the direction of a woman named Angela Key. And so we just reinterpreted that song. We heard it differently, involved a bunch of different artists, Amp Fiddler, who was a member of Parliament Funkadelic. I could go on, Doomini the Porous, Rain Man, all these great, Larry Frantangelo, who played on the original recording of One Nation. And so we made this video, and what we wanted to do was make a video that really represented Detroit, not like this, what's the word I want to say, contrived diversity, but no, a Detroit video that had diversity in it. And it resonated with the people. And it just took off and went viral, man. And then it earned us an Emmy.
Wow. Was that one of the greatest moments of your professional career? And also one of your greatest achievements is winning an Emmy? I can only imagine how wonderful that must feel.
Yes, but not because of the Emmy. You know what I mean? Like from an Emmy standpoint, yes, I would have never imagined that. I was more excited about Angela Key, the choir director, getting an Emmy because she's a mother, a grandmother, and worked for years full-time teaching plus being a choir director. And anybody who does that knows that's like a whole other job. And like I mentioned, Mr. Kitchen, when you're a choir director in Detroit, you're a mom, you're a babysitter, you're an advisor, you're feeding kids, you're helping. So she has done this for years with no accolades. And her kids went viral years before doing a rendition of Happy that was on the Ellen Show, but she didn't get any credit for that. So the fact that we convinced her to be in the video and she was a part of that and she got an Emmy, that was gratifying because I asked her to trust us and she did. And look at what happened. And kind of going back to where we talked about sports, you know, you grow up playing basketball, is a team sport. You know, a basketball team wins, the whole city has a parade. So this project was like hooping again. You know, my co-producer, the co-composer, LaShawn Gary, and then all these different players and components. That experience is one of the greatest of my life. And then the Emmy was just like, it was the cherry on top. Exactly. You know, and also that hardcore Detroiters who loved that song embraced it. That was the most important thing, that those people said yes. And on top of that, the man himself, George Clinton, gave us the nod and put it on his website. And you know what I mean? So yeah, that was definitely a highlight.
Yeah, that was unbelievable. I didn't even know that until I was preparing for this interview. Well, where does acting fit into your life? I mean, how important? I know you've got some pretty good gigs, and it sounds like you got talent. Do you enjoy that part of your work? And what are some of the projects that you've worked on?
I love acting. It is the craft that I would have. I mean, I give it the most respect in terms of what I do because it demands more than I've been able to give it lately. Mm-hmm. And so I look forward to getting back into it, and you can't cheat it. And so I feel like I got to give it more in this stage of my life. What happened was that we got film incentives in Michigan, and that opened the door. And so I, had a chance to work with Wood Harris on a film called Joy Road. And I had one line in The Ides of March. I had a scene, like a lot of my friends would say, how come you didn't tell me about this movie or that movie? I'm like, look, man, I'm not the man in this movie. I could get cut out altogether. So I'm not going to tell you about it because that's happened before. I had a whole scene in Batman versus Superman that didn't make the cut, and I was crushed. But just being on set for like a couple weeks and getting to watch Ryan Gosling, Paul Giamatti, and George Clooney work, man, that was unbelievable. I mean, I got like one line in that film, but I will never forget that experience. I get a chance to work with Eamon Walker on Chicago Fire. Very cool, gracious man, incredible actor. So, I mean, I've had some opportunities to have speaking roles, but well, now things are opening up where you don't have to be in New York or LA all the time. You can audition remotely, which is what happened for Chicago Fire. It's also how I got on 50 Cent's show, BMF. So I love acting. I really miss doing theater, which is what I started out doing in Detroit. But the time and the demands of it, and with me having children right now, make it difficult. But it has informed the way I look at life. It has informed the way I look at people, the whole notion of yes and. There's my perspective and yours. There's your concerns and mine. So where do they meet? There's a lot to pull from the craft of acting. And I respect it so much because it's really hard to do it well, and it's very easy to do it poorly. You know what I mean? So I want to give it more attention and time on over the next coming years.
So Mike, when you think about you're a young man, we're young, but I'm a 55-year-old guy, and you're probably 5 years behind me or so,
or 10 or 15. I'm not sure.
Who knows? Who's counting?
I don't know.
Yeah, and you kept yourself in great shape. You looked the exact same as I remember you down at UVA. As a performer and a writer, and all the things you do, how does your age factor into it? As you probably, I would think, you've gotten more experiences. You're probably getting better with time. But do you think about those things where how do I stay relevant? I mean, how am I gonna to do great things in the next 10, 20 years?
That's a great question. I just look at life from a different perspective, Julian. Like, what people have to understand is, like, for example, the music industry. We're learning a lot about how it really works now. I give those who excelled within it a tremendous amount of credit because they paid dues, enormous dues. So I don't want to disparage that. However, what I tell a lot of youth is there's a lot of room between broke and Jay-Z. So for me, age never really factored into it. I've always been influenced by my environment and by my own ideals and by purpose. So what I mean by that is, yeah, if I'm trying to be the top selling rapper in trap music and I'm trying to outdo, Lil Durk or whatever, I'm probably going to look foolish. But if I have an opportunity to use music, multimedia, spoken word, and my life experience to teach students at the University of Michigan, like I will this Friday, and connect dots between Nipsey Hussle, Joan Baez, and Muhammad Ahmed from Ethiopia, I feel like only I can do that. And only I can do that the way I do it. And so that's always going to be relevant, whether it's one person or 1,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the way I've looked at it. And whether I'm the artist out front or, like the video you mentioned, being a producer, I really enjoy producing other artists and working with other people. So I feel that as long as I'm listening and I'm observing, I'm always going to be relevant to myself. And if I'm relevant to me, at least one other person wants to hear, see what I have to present. You know what I mean? Women in Hollywood talk a lot about how the industry will make them feel irrelevant once they cross a certain age, you know, but, you know, they're breaking those barriers now. So it's kind of a yes and. Yes, within the industry, hip hop or certain things is a young man's game. But in the realm of artistry, you know, I'm about to go in front of these students from freshman to sophomore and elders, seniors in the Ann Arbor community. We're all going to be together. And I'm going to talk about Nipsey Hussle and Pete Seeger in the same lecture, because going back to African principles and the principles of Afroflow, I don't deal with past, present, and future, current, hip, not hip. I deal with the continuum. And the continuum is that past, present, and future are always present. You and I are linked and informed by our past. We're inspired by the present and the future. So it's all together. You know what I mean? Not trying to get esoteric on you. So I just think as long as I keep that perspective and I'm willing to work and what I'm doing is sincere and earnest, it'll have relevance.
Yeah. Well, last question, Mike, and this has been great. Your career and your life has been very, I don't want to say complicated, but there's a lot of layers to that. You know, a lot of people I talk to, they may work at a certain job, they play ball and they did great, and they work at a certain job for 10, 20 years, retire or whatever. You've constantly reinvented yourself. You've constantly had decision points where you had to make decisions about where to go on the artistry. You know, what you want to do. You left yourself in a situation where you have to make decisions about what you want to do. If you had to advise a young Mike Ellison, what advice would you give him if Mike is getting out of college, he's getting ready to start his professional career? What advice would you give Mike?
Man, that's a great question, because I'm still looking for advice from Mike. There's a lot of things. I mean, I think one of the expressions, or from a song, I say, time is the titan of humility, right? So we can all have ignorance and to some extent arrogance in our youth. And so I would advise Mike to listen more and not worry so much. And what I mean is, I don't even like saying advise Mike. It's not talking about myself in the third person.
I started it. So
yeah, I mean, I guess my point is I would worry less about things that really don't matter. You know, because as you mentioned, if we're honest, you come out of schools like UVA and other places, well, this person's doing this person's doing that, this person's doing that. And then some of us are still trying to figure out who and what we want to become. And then you do something that you feel good about, but then you're measuring it next to somebody else who did this. And I wouldn't worry about any of that. I never did that with my friends. I've always celebrated my friends. You know, I've never been envious of my friends. Like I mentioned, Carl Lowe, he'll never tell you this, but like, I think he was the youngest and the first Black, what do they call, like the chief medical officer of the Presbyterian hospital system in Charlotte. You know, Carl, this is just an aside, but like easily the most disciplined, principled person I've ever known my whole life. Done exactly whatever he said he was going to do. Got into every Ivy League school, but chose to go to UVA because they gave him a scholarship. And he thought that was the most noble thing to do for his parents because he had two siblings coming behind him. You know what I mean? By the way, you need to talk to Carl because his son Chase just won 2 back-to-back state championships in North Carolina, undefeated the past 2 seasons, and the MVP, and he just committed to William and Mary.
I'd love to talk to him. Yeah.
So you got to talk to Carl. Yeah. That father and son would be great. I'll link you. So going back to your advice, I would stay closer to friends like Carl, you know, but I just wouldn't worry about the things that don't matter, you know, beyond family, friends, health. A lot of the other stuff is just noise.
Yeah.
And I wasted a lot of years in my youth listening and getting engaged in noise that meant nothing at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I've admired you from afar for a long time. I knew you were, you have a lot of courage to take the path you did. And I've tried to live my life the same way. I've reinvented myself. I've tried new things, and it's the only way I can live my life. So I really like what you've accomplished, and I've kept up with you. I'm glad you decided to do this. And you said that we're going to get together next time you're in town. I'm gonna hold you to that, and I guess I'll probably see you at next weekend in Charlottesville.
Will send me in Charlottesville, and yeah, we have to link up. You know, I'm acting like I'm your co-producer here. Another person you could talk to, Nova legend, who's become one, Dr. Bill Booker.
Oh yeah,
because he's worked on a lot of athletes that have gone on to do things on the pro level. So he's in Arlington. So when you and I get together, we'll have to let Bill Booker come join us. But yeah, man, and I admire what you're doing. As I told you before, my hesitancy to do this was just the whole notion of, like, for me, it was like about sports and Nova legends. So the legends are, you know, some of the people I play with, and your Tommy Amakers and Brian Hill and Gus Hill and Dennis Scott and Michael Jackson. And I'm like, I don't belong in that conversation. So, you know, that was my hesitancy before.
Well, you know, it's interesting because you're the only guy that I've asked who didn't consider himself a legend. It just shows your humility. Women, oftentimes I've asked to be on the podcast. They're like, well, I really wasn't that good. The humility comes out with women that I've asked. Every guy that I've asked, absolutely. What time you need me on?
Let me be clear, man. I was not, nor am I, any legend, but I definitely appreciate you extending the Legends platform to me. Yeah. But I will say that I have been close to and around a number of legends. And so in that regard, I can speak to it. And most of the people are really hardworking people who've earned every bit of what they've achieved, you know?
Yeah. Well, Mike, you are a very good point guard. You won a regional championship as a point guard. So I think sometimes in life, I guess when you're friends with Grant Hill and you hung around a lot of great athletes, you may look at it that way. My son won. His team won the region in soccer last year. They were state finalists, and he was only a junior. And I said, "You'll never forget that." He doesn't understand it. I'm like, "You'll never forget that. That is a huge achievement." So I think you're selling yourself short as a basketball player, but the humility is great, and that's what probably drives you to do so many great things.
No, I appreciate that. No, I mean, those were great times, man. There's nothing more pure than that. As I mentioned, my friend Carl, going back to see his son win a state title, and he played flawlessly. It took me back to my high school days. So yeah, and I mean, look, I mean, there is the part of you that's like, okay, wait a minute, you know, I played with Grant, Rob, Jerome. If I didn't have those, like, you know, if I played for one of the other schools that weren't as proficient as South Lakes, I might have put up more numbers, but I don't know that I would have had the success and enjoyed myself as much as I did. And I like playing defense.
Yeah. I think you're very lucky to be part of that. That was an incredible team. They're lucky to have you, but it was amazing to be part of that team.
Yeah. And to your point, man, it feels good to be able to say, hey, man, I started on that team with those guys. So that does feel good, you know, that you earned your way on there. Did you ever talk to Shane Scott, who played at Herndon?
No, I remember him, but I haven't talked to him.
I don't know where Shane is, but you talk about battles. He was tough.
Yeah, he was.
Ask some of your friends about Shane, because he was ambidextrous. So back then, and he had the green light. He was tough, but we still never lost to Herndon.
That's a program. It's interesting. They have so many great players. I mean, I think after like South Lakes and TC, Herndon may have had more Division I players in the area, but they're kind of under the radar. I mean, they talk about Scotty Reynolds, of course, but they don't talk about Herndon in the same way they talk about South Lakes and TC and Mount Vernon, maybe.
They don't. And I'm going to tell you this. I mean, it's no disrespect to Herndon, actually. But I think Coach Hall was easily the best coach they ever had. And because I don't know that they've had that kind of success before him. And I haven't kept up, but what kind of success have they had after him?
Yeah.
And by the way, I think Coach Hall would tell you this, if I get my story correct, again, the great Reggie Kitchen, he advised the folks at Herndon to hire Coach Hall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always looking out for other people. With Julian, I know we're going on a bit, but one of the things I want to talk about, and maybe it's a different episode, but where I would appeal to you with this platform, I really do want to do something formal for Reginal Kitchen.
Yeah.
I've talked to his wife, Mrs. Kitchen, and the family was going through that, and then COVID, and we're all trying to catch our breath. But I talked to guys I grew up with in Northgate, guys from Cedar Ridge, Jimmy Wallace, other people who really love Mr. Kitchen. And you may not have known him as well as we did, but you have a number of people and you have this platform, man. So like, if I can circle back with you and share with you some of the thoughts we have, and if we can leverage this platform to get the support of all the people that love Mr. Kitchen and find a way to remember him in a lasting way, that would mean everything to us.
Yeah, I would love to be a part of that. And I also think Michael Jackson has been a little reluctant to do an interview. And I think if it was part of a Kitchen's type of celebration, my guess is he may even choose to be a part of that.
Man, listen, if you talk to Michael Jackson, because I can't reach him, you tell him we miss him, we love him, we respect him, and anything he has to say, we want to hear it.
Yeah,
because he made a lot of people believe, man. Mike was John Thompson came to Reston and Herndon to watch Michael play. Yeah. Like that meant everything to this area.
Yeah, I'll never forget that time he scored 39 in the regional final. Everyone talks about that game, but Michael Jackson was a legend. He was this unassuming, did his job, but an incredible talent.
He was incredible, man. Another, I mentioned Tommy Amaker. Again, Mr. Kitchen got me an opportunity to work Tommy Amaker's basketball camp one summer. And my roommate, I was a little scrawny kid. My roommate was Keith Gatlin, who was much older than me, but Keith Gatlin from Maryland. Yeah. And I'm sure he was like, man, how'd I get stuck with the little, snot-nosed high school or junior high kid or whatever? But he was so cool and gracious to me, man. And I'll never forget that. He was really kind, shared stories about Len Bias.
Mike, I want to thank you again for doing this. This has been great. Learned a lot. Hope people will go on YouTube, and I'll provide links for all your work so they can listen in. They can share with all their friends and their contacts as well. But I look forward to seeing you in person next week.
Absolutely, Julian. Thanks again, man. Enjoyed it.
Mike, it's been great, man. Take care, man.
Take care.
All right.